Last week at the Techonomy conference, I interviewed Intuit co-founder Scott Cook. And Scott was arguing that America needs to watch and perhaps even imitate the Chinese model of economic development. Scott specifically talked about Deng Xiaoping's establishment of a special economic zone in Shenzhen, which he says dragged 300 million Chinese workers out of poverty. That's one very interesting view, but we might have another view of Shenzhen and Xi Jinping and the rest of the Chinese political leadership from Mike Daisey, the star of Agony and Ecstasy of Steve Jobs. Mike, welcome again to TechCrunch TV.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, Mike, I'd love to get you in the same room as Scott Cook from Intuit. But,
I'd be glad to talk to him.
But
anytime.
What would be your response to Scott's points, which ran on TechCrunch TV last week?
Oh, well, I wish that Scott would come with me to Shenzhen. I'd like to introduce him to some people who are involved in his economic miracle. You know, I'd like to see him work on those lines. He could experience it. I think it'd be good for him. I think that the kind of moral equivalency people engage in to make themselves feel better about the hideous shit we do is entertaining. In fact, people make up fantastic fictions. It's true that bringing jobs to China fundamentally changed the shape of China. It is true that the lives in the villages that people have are incredibly hard, and they come to the cities in order to find a new life. But it is also true that we designed and built the terms of that special economic zone. It's a vicious place, and there are not basic human rights standards in place to keep people from being massively abused, poisoned, sickened, and killed. Those are basic things that we have for our workers in America that we chose not to export. We sent the jobs and not these standards. And the idea that anyone could be so out of touch, so deeply out of touch, that they would say that at a conference is absolutely sickening. I wish he could spend a couple of months working there. I really wish he could. I think he should.
Well, I hope Scott's watching this. What would he see, Mike, if you took him there?
If I took him and he didn't just walk around in the guided tours, you know, from a distance in the factories, he would meet workers whose hands have been destroyed from working the same repetitive way hundreds of thousands of times until their joints start to disintegrate. He would meet underage laborers, which is a huge problem across the entire zone. Apple's own supplier responsibility reports talk every year about how 40 to 50% of their own suppliers are in violation of their own internal rules that aren't audited by anyone else. He would find children working. He would find people poisoned by hexane, which is a known neurotoxin, until their hands shake uncontrollably. I'd be happy to take him and meet these people who receive no recompense from any of the companies, anyone that's poisoned them. This is part of the economic miracle we've created over there. And what's really appalling is that they could have done everything they've done. The cost of doing business is so low going into that zone that they could have done everything they've realized and still make a massive profit and have basic human rights in place. That's the part that's so appalling, is that their blindness led them to this place. And so to not even understand that, to simply talk about it as an unalloyed success, is just ignorance of the highest order.
If you took Scott, would you, and you weren't part of the guided tour, would you meet unhappy workers? Would you meet workers who were hateful towards their bosses and the companies that were owning the factories in Shenzhen?
Well, they're human beings. Yeah, I mean, I met people who hate their jobs over there. Certainly, I talked to hundreds of people. At the same time, you know, every culture is different. You know, what it means to hate a company in Shenzhen is different often than what it means to hate one in America. And that's an integral part of the story. It cannot be forgotten that every time we embrace these sort of economic miracles, these special economic zones, it cannot be forgotten that this is a fascist country run by thugs, that we choose to be complicit with an authoritarian country that is actually designed to prevent dissent, the reason why workers can be compelled to work until they literally die on the line is in part because they have been raised in an atmosphere of fear and control that makes that possible, and then we exploit that. And so the idea that people can talk about that as being just a fantastic thing we need to emulate, I'm sure Scott's a bright person. He's just extremely ignorant.
How responsible are other, I don't want to pick on Scott here, and he's not here to represent himself, but how, in your mind, responsible are senior executives at companies like Apple for this situation? Obviously Steve Jobs, who you talk about a lot in your show, but also the guys now running Apple in the post-Jobs world.
Well, Tim Cook was the COO. I mean, he set up these systems that they're using currently in Shenzhen. So I think he's extremely responsible. I mean, let's remember, there's what people are responsible for in an ethical sense, which is the human sense that I believe in. And then there's the whole reason we create corporations in the first place, which is to deny responsibility. The whole existence of the corporation is an attempt to create a limited liability construct so the people inside of it can do things that no individual would do on their own. So in that sense, corporations do the most hideous shit because they are not actually held to the same ethical standards that you and I are held to. So in the legal sense, they're not very responsible at all, are they? Which is one of the reasons they can do this. But in a direct ethical sense, in a human sense, they're extremely responsible. And when people stand up and decide to change the world, the way that those Apple campaigns always crowed on and on about thinking different and changing the world, when you choose to run one of these massive companies, you should shoulder a large responsibility to try to follow basic human rights, to not actually abuse the people that, that you're employing. This is not a high bar. Let's be clear. Companies in America, in the tech industry, are all arguing about whether they get bigger salad bars or smaller salad bars, and which company is still doing laundry for its employees, and what is Google giving people now, and who has beanbag chairs. I'm just talking about not killing the people who work at your company. And they do work at your company. You know, they love to talk about it as though they don't work at it. The only reason these subcontractors exist is to dodge U.S. labor laws. Like, let's be clear about that. Like, they would not subcontract to these people and have Foxconn and these other companies make 100% of all of Apple's products, for example, except that by doing so, they can avoid all legal responsibility. But it does not obviate them of actual human ethical responsibility. So if you're in charge of one of those companies, you have a high bar. You have a responsibility to try and do right.
At the Techonomy conference last week, Mike, there was this idea that America had gone wrong, that the political system had stagnated, that the economy was in crisis, and America had to learn from Silicon Valley, learn the innovation, the ability to reinvent. Another of the guys I talked to, Roger McNamee, who is a great supporter of Occupy Wall Street, argued that Occupy Wall Street, combined with the values of Silicon Valley, can revitalize America. I know that you're sympathetic to Occupy Wall Street, but my guess is that you wouldn't necessarily believe that Occupy Wall Street has much to learn from Silicon Valley, and that Silicon Valley is perhaps more of a problem than a solution to what's going on in America today.
Well, I would say, I think that in technology, it's filled with futurists. And I know because I am a reformed futurist. I loved the future when I was a young man. I loved thinking about utopias and dreaming about these gleaming futures that were always very, very beautiful and never had any homeless people and never had any serious problems. And that's the problem with utopian thinking, is you create these perfect systems that have very little to do with the actual universe we live in. Because of that, I actually question whether, not that Silicon Valley is bad for America, but that I really question, does Silicon Valley have that much to teach America? I mean, honestly, when we look inside our hearts, the biggest innovation of Silicon Valley the last 20 years is the same innovation a lot of America has done. He outsourced all the manufacturing. They sent all the jobs to China, had them made in these situations where they're being run by a fascist country, run by thugs, and they're working hand in hand with them to keep people employed in situations they would never, they would all be imprisoned for if they did them in America, and then concentrated on software, and therefore made all their business kind of vaporize into an intellectual mist. You know, there is no actual thing being made, it's software, which means you don't even have to ship things that work because we can be in constant beta. Is that so different than our political process? You know, the effort to try to not actually fix any fundamental problems, to push things off onto someone else in a far country or perhaps into the future if we don't want to take our problems now. And then when we do have solutions, have them be constantly half-baked. I mean, honestly, like I don't know that Silicon Valley's impression of itself as a brilliant mastermind of social change. I don't know that they have the balls for it. I don't know that they have actually done the hard work. I think that a lot of Silicon Valley is dominated by a kind of techno-libertarianism, a belief that I got mine when I cashed out my options. If you want yours, you should be in a bright company and then you'll have yours. And anyone who doesn't do something like that just isn't bright enough. It's a cult of the worship of the mind without enough empathy, honestly. And I say that as someone who loves technology and I love the devices, but like, seriously, we should wake up. Like, the world is more complex than that. The world is more interesting than that. And technology could have a brilliant role. Silicon Valley would have a brilliant role in the social lives, the artistic lives of people, if we would just take our hands and our eyes off our toys and actually look at the world around us. I think they could do amazing things. But I don't know if they're as bright and as advanced as they think they are.
Where should we be looking then for a model in the American economy? Is it the car industry, for example, that hasn't perhaps as much as Silicon Valley outsourced all the hardware jobs?
I don't know. I'll just be honest. I don't know where the American economy should look. That's not my métier. I honestly don't. You know, I won't just make up some answer to fill up space. I'll just say that I don't know where we should look. But I do know that what I'm concerned about are fundamental human rights. You know, and I do believe that work that's done, when things are made, they deserve a certain level of respect for the making of them. And I do believe people who love technology should love on some level the making of a thing, and the design of the making of a thing, the respect for how it was made should be part of the process of the thing being realized. And I think a lot of people listening to this who love technology, who love their software to be well made, who admire an excellently designed device, they can hear the truth of that. That's an important value. I do believe if we inculcated that value deeper into the bedrock of what it means to be in Silicon Valley and in America, that fundamentally that would improve our way of life.
Mike, you describe yourself as a reformed futurist, which is a kind of a negative title. How else would you describe yourself? What is another way to describe a reformed futurist? A traditionalist, a critic, a skeptic?
Perhaps I am a reverent realist. I believe in the situation we are actually in. I believe in the world as it is, but I also believe that we are charged with working to improve that world, that we are charged to improve the world that exists now, to work in the system we're in now. This is why I don't tell people to simply burn all their devices, you know, when they find out how they are made. It's not realistic, you know, they're part of us. They're part of everything we've made. But change has to begin somewhere. And so every night I perform the monologue and I talk to people after the show. I talk to them one-on-one because you can touch people in a deep way. This video will reach so many people, and I understand the value of that, but there's incredible value in actually speaking to a person. And if you can change a life one at a time, that is good work. So I believe in being a realist. I believe in trying to not let my reach exceed my grasp. I believe in trying to make modest steps that are pointed towards humanism in the hopes that the world becomes a better place.
Well, Mike Daisey, I think America's most compelling reverent of realism. I want to thank you once again for appearing on TechCrunch TV. I want to encourage everyone to go and see your show, The Agony and Ecstasy of Steve Jobs, which is now playing in New York. And I want to invite you back again very soon to talk more about what it's like to be a reformed futurist. Mike Daisey, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.